is an opportunity to tell you about an extraordinary European figure, a man that changed the face of Europe in the 20th century, and which was influential so that current Europe still comes from this breakthrough. So my idea is to tell you about the life and achievements of Jean Monnet in a chronological way. And I've selected some documents from the archives of his foundation, the Jean Monnet Foundation in Lausanne, just to illustrate, to be a little bit more concrete with what I'm going to tell you, and to give you a very, very short sample of what we have in Lausanne. Here you see Jean Monnet. He's here with his parents. He was born in 1888 in France, in Cognac, and you probably know Cognac because it's very famous for this delicious alcohol that is very pleasant to have with a cigar. And that's why when he was very young, he was already in the family business, and he started to travel around the world when he was 16. And he discovered other continents and culture, and especially North America, with this feeling that there is no limit, that spaces are big, you have large integrated economic areas and all this. And Monnet really, we can say, made his first political action in 1914. He was 26. Because of health conditions, he didn't go into the French army, but he saw that the French and the British were not going to coordinate their war effort, and that was a very bad thing. That's why he got an appointment with the French Prime Minister and explained him that it would be useful to make this coordination. So he was sent to London and contributed to the Allied war effort. And he was so effective at doing that he was noticed by the heads of government, of the powers. And so President Wilson and Prime Minister Clemenceau decided that they would promote his appointment as Deputy Secretary General of the newly created League of Nations. And this was an experiment in international collaboration, very important, full of hopes. But Monnet stayed there for 4 years. He got very disappointed because the League of Nations, even if it had a beautiful idea, an ideal, was not effective. And this was in Monnet's mind because of the right of veto and the fact that in these political sensitive matters, a single country could block everything. So in 1923, he went back to the family business industry, and then into the field of international economics and finance. But then, at the end of the 30s, threats were again on Europe, and Monnet decided again to put all his energy to help his country, France. And so, in 1940, he was in London, and this was really a tragic, but at the same time, extraordinary time. Because, as you know, on the 10th of May, Germany started the invasion of France, and the country was really rolled over in just a few weeks. And so in mid-June, Monnet was in London. There was a general not famous at all at the time, General Charles de Gaulle, who was Secretary of State. And there were some English officials, and all these people prepared a document. And you see, this explains that this was drafted on the 16th of June in a very, very difficult time. And again, as I've said, we have all these documents at the foundation, and we don't have time really to look through them in detail, but if you have any interest after my presentation to have the documents, of course I can give them to you. And this is really extraordinary. It's 1 page long, and it's the most revolutionary project designed by Jean Monnet with a few other French and British colleagues. It's the project to merge France and Britain. Because the war was turning so badly, the catastrophe was so close, that in these times of extraordinary crisis, solutions had to be extreme. And here you see the project really to create a Franco-British Union and to merge the two countries economically and politically. And at the time, even de Gaulle agreed with this. Of course, later he said that this was special, it was thought only for the time of the war, but still, you can see the evolution and you can still see the beginning of a very close contact between Monnet and de Gaulle. This came nowhere because on the following day Marshal Pétain got to power and decided to ask for the armistice. So this was a failed opportunity. But still you can see really that in extreme times, extreme ideas can come. And this is very nice because it's a handwritten letter from Charles de Gaulle to Jean Monnet. And you see, de Gaulle says that il serait absurde que nous nous contrarions mutuellement, puisqu'au fond, nous voulons la même chose et que l'un et l'autre, nous pouvons peut-être beaucoup. So de Gaulle says to Monnet that the two of them should collaborate because they have the same goals. And this is the signature of de Gaulle. And so Monnet, because he was so effective at planning and organizing, was sent by the British to Washington to coordinate, to have the supply of Britain and to start coordinating the war effort with the USA. As we know, this was not made public in the USA because until Pearl Harbor and the war declaration of Germany on the USA, the United States were officially neutral, but still planning was going on. And Monnet had these great logistical skills, and this was really his creation. He worked for months and months with many experts, and he was able to make the synthesis. Doesn't matter about the details, but you see, it's about what is needed in terms of armaments in 41 and 42 to be able to win the war against Germany and Japan. And this was the basis for the victory program proposed by President Roosevelt after the USA had entered the war. And then in 1943, Jean Monnet went to Algiers. After London and Washington, this was the third place where he went. And there he became a member of the French provisional government and was very, very important in his action because the USA hated Charles de Gaulle, but Monnet saw that at that time de Gaulle was the best person, so he promoted de Gaulle. And here you see Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, with Charles de Gaulle and then Giraud on the other side. And de Gaulle and Giraud were competing for French power. And you have high officials. For example, you see on the extreme left the future Prime Minister of Britain, Eden, and in the back the future Prime Minister Macmillan. Jean Monnet is on the extreme left. So Jean Monnet helped France recreating an army and getting the material it needed for the liberation of France. And when the war was over, France, of course, had been in the part of the countries having won the war, but it could very well have been different. And in fact, we know that the Americans had already printed banknotes for the occupation of France. So France was really saved. It was a kind of miracle due to the fight of these people. And we know that Charles de Gaulle and Jean Monnet had a very strong influence in this. So Monnet saw that the French economy was in shambles because of the war, the occupation or the destructions, but also because of the 1930s, because of this very long and deep depression. The country had suffered really a lot. And so Monnet had the idea to create a mechanism, a planning mechanism, to rebuild the French economy. And he proposed this to de Gaulle in 1945. And de Gaulle said yes. And so the High Planning Authority, le Commissariat Général du Plan, was created. And Jean Monnet became the General Commissioner, so the head of the reconstruction of France. And there he was able to create a wind of collaboration between labor unions and entrepreneurs and the state. So here you see the spirit of looking at the common interest, of promoting a common cause and trying to achieve it together. And there he did really a tremendous job. You see a picture is with a small team around him. So, between 45 and 50, Monnet did a lot of work. Many things changed in Europe. We know that there was the Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, the Iron Curtain, so the separation of Europe, and ideas, wonderful idea. You know all that in that city on the 19th of September 1946, there was this great speech by the former British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill. And so the atmosphere was very alive in Europe, but everything was blocked on a divergent view of which parts of sovereignty could be given to a higher authority, or which parts should stay at the level of single countries. And so many institutions were developed, such as the Council of Europe. On the military side, we know, of course, NATO, and an economic organization was created to administer the Marshall Plan. So many things were happening, but countries had not found a common ground to go beyond sheer intergovernmental cooperation. And in the spring of 1950, Monnet was witnessing a kind of worsening of the international situation. We know that the Korean War was going to start a few weeks later. And so the threat was really real about the German question. We know that the German question, to make things simple, came when Germany was unified in 1871. A country too small to be a hegemon, but too powerful to leave a peaceful mechanism of equilibrium. And there were German ambitions, the First World War, a harsh peace towards Germany, making them unhappy, but at the same time keeping them in a kind of strong position. In geopolitical terms, Germany was stronger after World War I than before. And so, with the crisis and with this awful ideology, the nightmare began in the 30s, leading to a kind of nearly complete destruction of the country. There was no more a German state in 1945. But then what should be done? It was not possible to get an agreement between Allied powers, so de facto came the division of Germany. And the Americans were demanding that West Germany would contribute to the economic and military effort of the West. And the other powers had still fears against Germany. France, at the time, had the spirit of revanche. And so this had been really the big trauma in international affairs for decades and decades. And the possibility of a Franco-German friendship seemed very far away, and it could have been really a disaster. And so Monnet, in a few weeks, with a few collaborators, designed a plan. And to do this, he had a it was a very serious work, you see. It proves that you don't need to be in an office to work seriously. There are different ways to work. Here he is in his garden, close to Paris, with Robert Schuman. Robert Schuman at the time was the French foreign minister. He was born as a German citizen because Moselle had become German, then became French after World War I, then again German during World War II, then French. So he had this feeling of what borders were and what absurdities they had brought and what disaster they had created. And so Jean Monnet prepared a plan. It was needed to have Jean Monnet because then they wouldn't have had any plan. But Monnet was the chief architect of the reconstruction of France. He was not a politician, and he needed to have the political endorsement of a powerful person. And Monnet found this with Schuman, and that's why we have this Schuman Declaration. In fact, the best is to say the Monnet-Schuman Declaration, made public on the 9th of May 1950. And today, the 9th of May is the day of Europe. So this was the beginning of European integration. And so the final product given by Jean Monnet to Robert Schuman was 4 pages long. This is the 9th and final project. You see, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. That's the beginning of European integration. The idea of Monnet was to create a coal and steel community which would be open to all the countries of Western Europe that would be interested in taking part of this. But the core would be the joining of France and West Germany, so that there could be a kind of enduring peace and friendship. Monnet had thought that global designs, so the idea to create a European federation, were not possible. But still, he had this vision, because he was not a technocrat at all. For him, the idea was to create the European federation. But he saw that it would be necessary to do it in successive and practical terms, to show to countries that it would not be hell to do this, to increase solidarities between them, and to take back what he had experienced before. So the idea that when there are challenges, when there are difficulties, countries should sit around the table, look at their common interest, find common solutions that would not just be the single common denominator, but that would be really the best solution for the whole of Europe. And Monnet was very much believing in the principle of the community of law. The idea, and the other founding fathers shared the same view, was that force and war had been so awful, so disrupted, and they had brought Europe to nothing in 1945. It means that with that year 0, Europe had lost the mastery of its common destiny, and it was separated and under the domination of 2 extra-European powers, the USA and the USSR. So the project was really a project for peace, where war and threats should be banished from the relations between the members of the newly created community, and so law was that important. And Monnet also considered that institutions were very important because people have a wisdom, and the founding fathers and many other Europeans had witnessed the war. They had seen how awful it had been. But at the same time, with decades passing, then people would tend to forget. And that's why the role of memory is so important. So institutions allow to create this community of law. And they are very important for smaller countries because for large countries there can always be the temptation to use power and strength, even if it's not anymore military. But for small countries it is vital to have a community of law and common institutions thinking in terms of the common interest. And there you not just had representatives of governments in the council, but also the high authority that later became the European Commission. You had an assembly that became the European Parliament and a court of justice. And these common institutions were really there to create this community of law. And so you see the proposal is to take coal and steel, two very sensitive sectors because they were at the heart of the war effort at the time, and so to supranationalize them with the creation of a community based on the rule of law. So this is the philosophy, this is the spirit of the Monnet-Schuman Declaration, and this led to the signature of the Treaty of Paris and the birth of the European Coal and Steel Community. This was a nice symbolic event taking place in Luxembourg in 1953, where for the first time you had a piece of steel that was not anymore national. It was European steel. That's why it's written on it, you may see it, Europe, E-U-R-O-P. It's not finished because it could be Europa or Europe or Europe. And this is really the first object showing that Europe had become a reality. So the single market for coal and steel was being established. But things could have been quiet and easy, but they were not at all, because the international situation made it necessary to create, to use the economic potential of West Germany so that the defense capabilities of the West could be enhanced. And of course in Europe there was a great fear to see the creation again of a German army. And the Americans were saying, we need to mobilize the West German potential. And that's why, with a very strong input by Jean Monnet, there was this Pleven plan of the fall of 1950, aiming at creating a European defense community. And then there would also have been a European political community. Because we know that if there is a common defense, there is a common foreign policy, so the civilian authorities must run it, so there is a need to have federal institutions. And if this project had been adopted, it would have been the creation of the European Federation, very fast and I would say very effective, and very much in base with the previous historical experiments of the creation of states. But it didn't work like this. The French Parliament refused the project in 1954. This was the first huge crisis in European integration. Everything could have been destroyed. And even Jean Monnet was very bitter. It's interesting because when you read his memoirs, he said, well, yes, this was a crisis, but there were other crises. It could be surpassed. But this is a personal handwritten note he wrote on the 1st of September, which means 2 days after the vote of the French Parliament. And here you see he was very bitter and very worried and considered that it was a big mistake, a foolish act for Europe. And so he decided to withdraw from the presidency of the High Authority, so the ancestor of the European Commission, because he wanted to act to help relaunch Europe. So in 1955, he left the High Authority and created the Action Committee for the United States of Europe, which was his way to help promote the relaunch. And the relaunch came in 1957. Let me just show you. This is an example of a letter that Monnet wrote to all the main political parties and labor unions in the the coal and steel community to create this committee to think about the common good of Europe and to relaunch it. And there is a very important sentence because it encapsulates really the philosophy of Monnet. I will translate it in English. Monnet writes so to all the parties and unions, so it's really the basis of this fight. A simple cooperation between governments will not be enough. It is necessary that the countries delegate some of their powers to European federal institutions who will act on behalf of all the countries. And really, here you have the key question. It's probably the most important question in European affairs. It's the question of the articulation of national sovereignty with the common European project. When you think about European integration, you see that the word integration shows that it's not just international relations with the cooperation of countries in intergovernmental organizations, in which case each country will keep a veto and can block everything that it doesn't like. With integration, you have something more. You have this idea that in some specific and sensitive fields, you need the delegation of powers, and Monnet was convinced of this. For example, if you want to create a postal union or to have a cooperation on science, it may very well be enough to have cooperation between countries, and in such a case, you can have very nice, very great institutions. If today we think of the Council of Europe, the CERN, EFTA, OSCE, many organizations, you see that they are useful, they do great things. But Monnet's thought was, when it was about changing the mind of the people, to create the vision of enduring peace, it was needed to allow an evolution of the mentality of states. And really there, the idea was that in some cases, a country should not be allowed to block everything. And so here comes the idea that there can be majority vote, that there can be a European parliament that will be elected by the people. At the beginning it was not the case, but since 1979 it has been so. And that these national representatives needing to reach a huge, important threshold, but not unanimity, and these MEPs having this legitimacy directly from the people, in specific cases given by the treaties, could be allowed to take decisions by majority. And this is really a choice of philosophy, of politics, that was really at the heart of the European Union of today. And when you have this supranational law, when you have this parliament, the role of the Commission, the majority vote in the Council, the Court of Justice, you have these key elements And all of them came from the 1950 declaration prepared by Jean Monnet. But then, of course, they evolved, they changed. So you had the DNA of the project contained in the 50 project, and then the project was open. It would be what future generations would do of it, and it is still the case. That's why we have a project that is not at all finished. And so for Monnet, it was really a lot of work to create the relaunch leading to the treaties of Rome in 1957. Then the 60s were a very difficult decade because French president was Charles de Gaulle, and Monnet and de Gaulle had always had a lot of respect on a personal level, but they had completely diverging views of what should be the role and the scope of European integration. De Gaulle was okay for cooperation, but France should not lose powers to a supranational community. And de Gaulle had also the idea that France, a big power, an important nation, should lead Western Europe. And the view of Monnet was, of course, different. And when you look at this, you see another picture that we have in Lausanne. It's in 1962 when former President Eisenhower of the USA, with his wife and 4 grandchildren, pays a visit to Jean and Sylvia Monnet in Oujaret, close to Paris. Here you have another photos at the White House with President John F. Kennedy and Jean Monnet. And this shows us that there was always an interest by Jean Monnet on the American and also Canadian experience. And Monnet, of course, didn't want to replicate the American experience because it's not the same conditions, but for him it was always interesting to look at the case of completed federations. And so the idea, the ambition of Monnet was to unite Europe progressively, starting with the economy, but always having a view that the soul, the final purpose of the project is political and not economic, and that this ever closer union would lead one day, he couldn't know when, to a project that would really become mostly political. And Monnet also developed in the 60s a global vision, and this is very interesting because for him it was clear that Europe had to be a partner of the USA, because for him it was clear that the best way for the Western world was to be united so that the Soviet Union would respect this strength and this unity, and for him it was the best way to promote peaceful coexistence. But at the same time, Monnet was very keen on the fact that Europe should never be a kind of junior partner of the USA. The two partners had to be equal powers. Of course, when you surf on the internet, you may read from time to time that Monnet was just in favor of the USA, and that's all. Some people even say that he was an American spy. Of course, this is nonsense. He was in favor of this collaboration, but really he wanted Europe to grow and to become equal. Let me now move to Jean Monnet's legacy, because he had to fight in the 60s, as I said, and in the 70s he decided to retire from public life in 1975 at the age of 87, which is really amazing. It's an amazing age to retire. But it was not a complete retirement, because he still wrote his memoirs to be able to share his experience, and he created the Jean Monnet Foundation for Europe in Lausanne. Here you see this, I really find this letter so great. It's signed by President John F. Kennedy, the American president. And for me, there is a paragraph that is the best way to summarize, in my opinion, Monnet's life and action. I will just quote this paragraph. For centuries, emperors, kings, and dictators have sought to impose unity on Europe by force. For better or worse, they have failed. But under your inspiration, Europe has moved closer to unity in less than 20 years than it had done before in 1,000. You and your associates have built with the mortar of reason and the brick of economic and political interest. You are transforming Europe by the power of a constructive idea. End quote. And in 1976, Monnet also received the honor to become the first honorary citizen of Europe. And this is Monnet's diploma, signed by the 9 heads of state or government of the time, being part of the European Council. And we know that after him, Helmut Kohl got this distinction in 1998 and Jacques Delors in 2015. And here there is one very, very important sentence. It says that Jean Monnet s'est attaqué résolument aux forces d'inertie des structures politiques et économiques de l'Europe dans le but de créer un nouveau type de relation entre États, de faire apparaître les solidarités de fait existant entre États européens et de les traduire en termes institutionnels. You also have here a summary of the Monnet method. You see inertia, the resilience of national sovereignty are key elements of Europe. And Monnet saw the necessity to go beyond this. Of course, not to distract countries and nations, not at all. He was very much in favor of what had become subsidiarity. In Switzerland, we would say federalism. You have beautiful notes in his archives when he says that Europe should only do what it can best do, and so it means foreign policy, defense, and economic integration, and not going into the unnecessary details. So it's a great vision, but you see, it's about inertia, it's about economics and politics, and it's about looking at the common interest, creating the common solidarities, and making them lasting with law and institutions. And Jean Monnet created his foundation in Lausanne because he became close to a young professor in the 1950s, Henri Ribon, professor at the University of Lausanne. Here you see Ribon and Monnet. And in the archives, we find the diary in 1966. It's very difficult to read, of course, Jean Monnet. And that's why, in the first years of the foundation, his former secretaries were taken, I hope not by force, to Lausanne, and they had to make the transcripts so that it's possible to read this. And we have, of course, the transcripts in the archives. But it's interesting because in a few pages, you see Jean Monnet really decides that he will give the archives to Lausanne because Henri Ribon, you see, is really a great professor doing a tremendous job and being very much involved and active in teaching, research, and also in speaking to the common citizens. It seems that Henri Ribon, during his academic career, made 3,000 speeches across Switzerland. And so it was really normal. And here you see it's a letter from 1967. It's really the beginning of the official process that led to the creation of the Jean Monnet Foundation for Europe in 1978. Henri Ribon was president for 27 years until 2005. Then there was Bronisław Geremek, the Polish hero of Solidarnosc, great European. Then José María Gil Robles, also an opponent to Franco, a great European that who was president of the European Parliament. And since January, we've had as our new president, Mr. Pat Cox, who is also a former president of the European Parliament. And so our foundation has Monnet's archives. Then the size of the archives has doubled over the years, so we take care of these. We make them available to researchers. And then we have other activities because Monnet wanted the foundation to be also looking at today's Europe and the future. And that's why we organize public conferences, debates, we have publications, and of course teaching at the university, very, very important for us. And great moments such as tonight, when it's really wonderful to have been able, to have been allowed to share the life and the achievements of Jean Monnet, really a great person. And I think this is the end of my presentation, a little bit too long. Thank you so much for your attention.